Hello, fellow humans. How are we doing? So I wasn't gonna make this video, partially because I didn't want this channel to be about, hard politics, mostly just how they sort of can incorporate into media analysis. Also because I'm tired, like as a general rule. I'm just so exhausted, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. I have lost sleep. It has been the longest week of my life for multiple reasons. So I'm just going to, toss my opinion into the proverbial void. Because what else is there to do? So, what I've been seeing online for the past couple days is basically like three schools of thought floating around. We have people on both the left and the right who feel that this election is extremely important and have spent the last few days being loudly anxious and angry and antagonistic towards the opposing side. Then we have the peacemakers who might prefer one candidate over the other, but ultimately think that it's not worth fighting about. And then we have the apoliticals who are basically like, it doesn't matter either way, it's not gonna affect us, it isn't all that important. And they just don't want to get into it because they're not really interested in all of the fuss. I'm going to sort of talk about these three groups in reverse order. So, starting with the apolitical people who kind of feel like they're divorced from politics. I know there are different ways to use that term. For you guys, using apolitical that way, like, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be apolitical? What does it mean for something to be political in the first place? Can you even be apolitical? I find a lot of the time when people tell me that they're not that into politics, it's basically shorthand for saying, yes, I absolutely have a political opinion, but it's not based in anything like research. Like, I haven't got into it. Instead, their opinions will usually be based either A, in their direct experiences and personal moral compass, B, in pre-established cultural norms or generally accepted beliefs, or C, a little bit of both. In other words, they'll hear an argument or a slogan, appeal to their own feelings of common sense, and then never look into the issue any deeper than that. And despite their sort of laissez-faire feelings about politics, they might still get mad or even defensive if you challenge them on their ideas, or they'll just say, it's just my opinion, as if that shields them from criticism or means that their ideas can't be wrong. All this sounds very judgy, but I understand where you're coming from, and I don't think that I'm immune to this. In fact, I don't think anybody really is. I say all of this speaking from personal experience. Like, back when I used to call myself apolitical, this is exactly how I used to think. I didn't want to talk about or think about subjects like feminism or black activism because I didn't want to deal with all the baggage and it wasn't all that interesting to me in the first place. But despite that, I totally did have opinions on these things. I didn't recognize the sexism and racism that I'd experienced in my own life. I believed on some level that people were responsible for their own success and that work ethic could overcome any barriers. And I'd internalized the idea that the fight for these groups was over and that all that was left was complaining about nothing and finding reasons to be upset. And I didn't want to be upset. It's part of the reason why I gravitated towards the LGBT activism instead. Their threat was clear and present, upfront legal discrimination and open, casual hostility. And my acceptance of these groups, conveniently, didn't really contradict anything that I already believed. More importantly, I associated the movement with positivity, like love is love, be your own authentic self, rainbows and parties and discrimination, boo, gay people kissing in front of amorphous blobs of hateful bigots, happiness in the face of hatred. It felt accessible and welcoming, and I also didn't get very much deeper into that. And it was great. I certainly wasn't feeling the way that I'm feeling now. My life was way less stressful when I was comfortable knowing less, but it also made me extremely successful. It also made me extremely successful. extremely susceptible to half-cocked arguments. Oh my god. And yes, I would get angry when challenged about my beliefs that I didn't really care about. It has been quite a year for politics. Everything feels very urgent right now. And I think a lot of people are getting involved because of the show of it all. Like the protests, the civil unrest, talks of civil war and revolutions, the polarization of a global health crisis, the tidal wave that is the obvious, sure to be horrible fallout of having a government that largely refuses to be useful during a time when whatever side you're on, the general population is desperate and suffering and could really use a functioning government. At the same time, though, we're also reckoning with the fact that most of our problems aren't new and maybe politics has always been important. Which brings me to the peacemakers. We have a tendency to think of politics and political literacy as being like a sport or a hobby, something that you can pretty easily opt out of, something that can be engaging and even deeply emotional, but it's not all that serious. I hear people say a lot that it's immature or petulant or silly to cut ties with someone because of their politics. And I believed that for a long time. But to go back to that question that we posed earlier, what is politics? Is it just about supporting specific policies of politicians? Are health mandates political? Are civil rights political? Education, healthcare, law, and law enforcement are certainly political. Does something become political when politicians decide to care about it? When we decide that politicians should care about it? Is food political? What about housing? People can have bad politics and still be a good person, and vice versa, is what I'm told. That sounds right. I've met those people, but how far does that go? Is the argument there that it doesn't matter what you believe, only what you do? How much can we be expected to really separate the two? How much can we really compartmentalize people's beliefs? I've also heard people compare politics to religion to justify, oh, we should all have this sort of to each his own attitude or just not talk about it. But I really don't buy that. Like, theoretically, big theoretically, your religion should be very personal and not really affect other people that much. If you believe that sex before marriage is wrong because of your religion, theoretically, your belief should only affect your actions. Politics, on the other hand, is designed to affect everyone. This is why I find that bit about just accepting everyone's politics as completely innocuous different opinions to be retroactively indefensible. Your politics, to a large extent, say something about how you think people are and should be treated. Politics is heavily steeped in morality. Why shouldn't that factor into how you feel about a person? To be clear, I'm arguing here against the idea that politics shouldn't be important at all to interpersonal relationships because it's more important to be nice and non-divisive than it is to act like the ways in which we choose to build our society and how we consider the harm that that construction allows for and perpetuates is inconsequential, maybe because it doesn't personally affect us or feels abstract. And yeah, I have considered the arguments for this way of thinking. We can't learn from each other if we don't listen to each other's opinions. We have to live with each other even if we don't disagree. I hear you. I even think it can sometimes be counterproductive to boil people down to their politics. And I do believe that people can be too quick sometimes to cut others off without really trying to talk to them or change their minds. And yes, I also think that minor points of contention aren't really worth losing friends over. However, where I ultimately land on this is that, look, everyone has a line. Even if you say that you shouldn't divorce your friends over politics, you probably also have a line. Like, say you're POC and then your friend out of nowhere hits you with a, yeah, I believe in having a white ethno-state. I mean, you're cool, you're one of the good ones, but in general, desegregation was a bad idea. Assuming that you don't also agree with this person, are you really telling me your response to that's going to be, well, I don't agree with you here, but we all have different opinions? I mean, I should hope that's not your response. Even if you aren't POC. Like, serious question, is it acceptable for you guys to be friends with somebody or date a racist if you just don't talk about it? Now, I suppose you can try to form that guy, but there's nothing self-righteous or immoral or immature about saying, right, cool, I don't want to associate with you, never talk to me again. And okay, maybe you think that, sure, in extreme cases, this might be appropriate, but supporting this or that candidate doesn't really carry that kind of weight. And maybe for you it doesn't, but there are still people who'd be friends with Mr. Ethnostate. Also, I find that when a lot of people say this, they act as if voting for a certain politician is a completely separate thing from voting for their policies, which in turn deeply affect other people's lives, sometimes in a detrimental way. It isn't like choosing cults over patriots or apple pie over pumpkin pie. The distinction isn't irrelevant, it isn't arbitrary. I guess my point is that it shouldn't be up to some third party to shame someone for where they draw their line. Like, do I have opinions on where you should draw your line? Absolutely. The whole guilt by association thing is a line drawn that really gets under my skin. Disavowing someone you like because they talk to someone you don't like is, in my opinion, a bad place to draw your line. But you know, if you feel uncomfortable associating with that person, then who am I to tell you that you're a bad person now for not doing so? And look, I even acknowledge that it can get more complicated than just the three things that I've listed out here. I mean, when you make this choice in real life, there are other things to consider. The situation could be wildly different on a case-by-case basis. Do you consider how long you've known that person? Where their bad ideas might be coming from? How likely you think it is that they can even be persuaded out of those ideas? And what good is the separation doing? Will it make you feel better? Will it make the other person reevaluate their position? Or will it just push them further towards groups that have equally bad or even worse ideas? If you stay and remain silent, are you complicit? If you argue about it, especially consistently, are you putting yourself in a mentally damaging situation? Can you change someone's mind who isn't willing to have their ideas challenged? Should you try? How significant is this relationship to you? How much of an actual effect is it even going to have on your life if you decide to drop that person? Are we talking about unfriending or unfollowing or blocking someone on social media or moving apartments? How much do you rely on that person physically or mentally? It's really difficult to find people who have your back and love you unconditionally, and it can feel impossible and heartbreaking to see that person as a bad person for the things that they believe, especially if it doesn't affect you. It's a complex issue. Right, what were we talking about? Oh yeah. So, group number one. I'm in group number one. I have unfriended people, mostly people that I don't even really talk to anyway, for publicly defending Trump, mostly because I don't need that in my life. I've also been in a situation where someone I care deeply about is on the other side of me on a lot of important issues that I have very strong convictions about. And I do find it deeply upsetting, and I don't think I'm wrong for feeling that way. To group number two, the peacemakers, I understand. The last few months have been a wild ride, and you don't want things to escalate. That's perfectly reasonable. But I think we're past the point where a high five or a handshake can fix any of that. And to group three, don't try to be apolitical is my advice. You don't have to make politics your whole life, but politics are important all the time, and political literacy is an essential skill, so have some curiosity about it, even if you don't find it super entertaining. I mean, I can't make you do that, but people who pretend apathy are usually lightning rods for bad politics is all I'm saying. Hopefully by the time that I've posted this video, we will have exited limbo. Let's hope.